This paper is on seasonal variations in household food security and dietary diversity and the association with maternal and child nutritional status in rural Ethiopia. As you can see, there's a number of authors. The authors are colleagues from University College Cork and from Haramaya University and Mekelle University in Ethiopia. And this study is a sort of exploratory study that really tries to integrate some of the food security data that we collected and some of the nutritional data and sort of look at associations between them. And it's part of a broader study called AgriDat, which is funded by the Irish government's Development Cooperation Programme. So background, low dietary diversity is generally associated with chronic undernutrition in children. One of our co-authors found in some related work that infant dietary diversity is associated with maternal dietary diversity, not surprisingly. Ethiopia, generally there's very low dietary diversity amongst mothers and infants in Ethiopia generally, and there's a lot of recent studies to show that. In addition, then, seasonality is a major factor in Ethiopia. Food availability and access are strongly affected by seasonality, and many households face severe food scarcity during the lean season. And seasonality has been shown in a number of papers to have an effect on dietary patterns. So the aim of this study, is basically to look at associations or to sort of explore associations between measures of food security, the sort of standard measures of food security, and nutritional status of mothers and children. Often household food security indicators such as dietary diversity are taken as proxies of nutritional status, but we wanted to explore, are they actually good measures, and also is there variation over seasons such that, do household food security indicators provide a sort of better association with nutritional status in one season compared with another. So, as I said, it's an exploratory analysis and not quite complete, I would say. But essentially, we're looking at, to what extent are food security indicators adequate proxies for nutritional status, and do these associations differ on a seasonal basis? So, study design, we had two study areas in Ethiopia, one in East Hararghe zone in Oromia, and one in southeastern Tigray in the north. 400 households selected in each area. Detailed livelihood and food security data collected in two seasons, post-harvest and lean season. So post-harvest is kind of after October, November, and lean season is around July, August. So lean season is pre-harvest season. Now, from those total of 800 households, we had a subsample of 183 from which we collected nutritional data from mothers and children of 6 to 23 months old, and that was anthropometric measurement and also blood tests for zinc, iron, ferritin, and hemoglobin. And then we calculated the sort of standard food security indicators, household dietary diversity score, the food consumption score, and HFIAS. But also we calculated infant dietary diversity score and women's dietary diversity score. And these are some of the data. First of all, the sort of the values of the scores, both for pre-harvest and post-harvest, and then the percentage figures are the percentage of the samples who are either food insecure or undernourished according to standard definitions. So just to highlight perhaps a couple of the scores there, the infant dietary diversity scores in pre-harvest, 80% of infants were under the minimum infant dietary diversity score, meaning they consume less than 4 of food groups out of 7 food groups. And for women's dietary diversity score, again, over 80% consumed less than 5 food groups, so they were in food insecure in that sense. The length RAID Z score, which is measures stunting, there was an actual increase between post-harvest and pre-harvest. We measured post-harvest first, and then pre-harvest, and the thing is, you don't expect a major variation from 39% in post-harvest to 48% in pre-harvest. But essentially, you're measuring the same infant 6 months later, and essentially what this is telling us is that over that time period, the stunting situation for that cohort of children became deteriorated. We can also say that maternal hemoglobin levels and maternal BMI worse in the lean season than in the post-harvest. And essentially that's what I've just said. But I suppose the other point, which isn't in the data, is that there are major regional differences. Actually, somewhat surprisingly, infant dietary diversity score and women's dietary diversity score were better in the pre-harvest season, in the lean season in Eastern Harage, and worse in Tigray. And this seemed to be related to a connection with markets, that in Eastern Harage there's a much greater orientation towards markets, and that meant there was much more sort of purchasing of food in the lean season. And it's associated, for those who know Ethiopia, with sales of chat, sort of narcotic that gets a good market value, and that enabled people to buy other foods in the lean season. So then we've conducted some regression analyses, basically trying to tease out the relationships between the household level food indicators and the individual measures of dietary diversity of women and infants, and also some nutritional indicators for mothers, in particular maternal BMI, maternal hemoglobin and maternal ferritin. So the regression analyses controlled for socioeconomic variables and also controlled for agroecological zone. So just in terms of the relationship between household food security indicators and women's nutritional status, I suppose what comes out is that the strongest associations are between the food consumption score in both seasons and almost all the measures of women's dietary diversity, maternal BMI, and also maternal hemoglobin. That the other indicators, HFIS and household dietary diversity score, there are some associations with some of the indicators, but the strongest associations are with food consumption score, which of course measures not just diversity, but also quantity, or implicitly it measures quantity by measuring frequency. So the sort of summary from the analysis of the relationship between household food security scores and women's food security is as their strong association between household food security and women's dietary diversity, particularly in the pre-harvest season and also in the post-harvest with the food consumption score. Maternal BMI and hemoglobin are associated with food consumption score in both seasons, which indicates, as I said, the quantity of food and frequency of consumption are important influences of maternal BMI and hemoglobin, as well as diversity. With regard to then the association between household food security indicators and infant nutritional status, the major associations are that infant dietary diversity is significantly associated with the food consumption score and household dietary diversity score pre-harvest, but not with the HFIS. I should have mentioned that we've found in other work that there's a very strong influence or a very strong association between all the household level food security measures and education of mothers in the pre-harvest season. That seems to indicate the sort of the role of mothers in sort of, you know, addressing some of the sort of food shortage issues in pre-harvest. And I guess once you know, women are addressing those, once sort of women are addressing dietary issues in the pre-harvest, then that also affects the dietary diversity of their children. There are stronger associations between infant dietary diversity measures and HFIS post-harvest, and I think that in a sense indicates that there are chronically food insecure households in those parts of Ethiopia where even post-harvest they lack food, and that, or they sort of have food but not in adequate quantities, and that is indicated in low dietary diversity even post-harvest, whereas for most other households, post-harvest, there's generally more food available, and the HFIS figures are generally better post-harvest as well. Conclusions then, household food consumption score is particularly well associated with indicators of individual food security and also with the nutritional indicators that we measured, maternal BMI and hemoglobin. We measured some others as well, but they're not reported here. And it's also associated with children's weight for length Z-score in both seasons. So I guess what that tells us is maybe not a surprising finding, but that food consumption score probably is the sort of best indicator, if you like, of nutritional status, both at the household level and at the individual level, in the sense that it measures both frequency of consumption and diversity. We did notice associations between children's weight for length Z-score and length for age Z-score with household dietary diversity in post-harvest, which again suggests that improved dietary diversity post-harvest improves the nutritional adequacy of children. I suppose what we found was that different food security indicators have different relationships with the nutritional status of mothers and children, and these relationships vary by season. So it suggests the need to use multiple indicators and multiple measurements of food security, not sort of just assume that, let's say, a particular food security indicator is sort of an adequate representation of what the food security status in a household actually is. And I guess the final thing then was that we need to do further work to assess associations between food security indicators and key measures of nutritional status. And also we need to, as I think all the other papers have said this morning, take care of context, because actually, although we've sort of tended to aggregate the data here, in fact what we found is that there's very substantial differences between these two parts of Ethiopia. So thank you.